they only look, boys and girls, the only reason there are white people is because black people came here first. And they faded as they moved farther and farther north from the equator. Their melanin faded so that their skin, their hair, and their eyes got lighter. Their brains didn't get smaller, but their skin, their hair, and their eyes got lighter. That's the only reason you children can call yourselves white. And you aren't white. We are all shades of brown.
Scripture tells us that we're not ignorant of his devices, because Satan has been using the same tactic all the while and using the same people all the while ever since the beginning and dawn of time. Divide and conquer. Divide and conquer is his strategy. Even though we are all one race, one creation of God, he sees that if people are greedy, or if people are mean-spirited, and without the love of Christ in them, he can use them to cause all kind of confusion in the world that we live in today. This is what we're dealing with.
The whole history of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It starts in the colonies of what would become the United States. Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking, right? Because they think whiteness is real, right? But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other before we figured out there were other people to kill. We just killed each other, right? I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody, and everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count, that's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, you know, in the colonies, the colonial elite looked around and they realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up and they were like, damn, we got to figure out a way to split these folks apart from one another or they're going to rise up and take our stuff, right? Because after a while, these black folks who were enslaved Africans and these quote unquote white folks who were poor Europeans are going to figure out they're all getting played by these rich people, right? So ultimately the rich figure out they got to come up with some way to get somebody in that group on their team. The easiest thing is to get the poor Europeans, right? Because at least they look like you. They sort of share some of the customs and the culture. So they all of a sudden create this thing called whiteness and they say, now you're part of the club.
No truer words has ever been spoken. And ain't nothing changed. Everything is still the same as it's always been. It's because of the trick of Satan. You see, before there was slavery, there was something called indentured servitude. It didn't matter if you were white or black, you could be an indentured servant. And then, as the poor class grew and grew, the rich people realized that if the poor class ever wanted to exert power, exert authority, to take over, to rebel, they had power among each other because of the numbers. And they devised a plan that was ingenious. Until this day it's working. You see, right now in the United States, the upper 1% is richer than the rest of the 99%. Let me say that again. The richest 1% of America is richer than you combine all the other 99% that we're not talking about at the top of the upper class. How is it that in the United States, after the election, you have some of the richest people, billionaires, in office, still running? You have some of the richest people in Congress, richest people in Senate, richest people telling the poor people what to do, telling the poor people what to care about. It's because they've been successful, again, in letting some of the middle class or lower class poor people, and I'm going to say white, which is not a thing. I keep telling people that we are one race. However, those that identify themselves as white, Caucasian, European, all right, that they're better than brown-skinned people, Hispanics, people of African descent, Caribbean descent, all this other stuff. No. So it's a bunch of divide and conquer. It's the same thing today as it's always been. And the problem is, it's not the lower class or the class of people who are brown-skinned. That's the main problem, even though some of them also voted for Trump, MAGA, Christian nationalism, Make America Great Again. It is the people who have been charged of being, quote unquote, the taskmasters, or the people over the brown-skinned people. If they would realize that, no, you're not really part of the 1% upper class, your economics, your truck, your land, your trailer house, your trailer park, let you know that you're a part of the class who you think you're better than. No, if there's classes, it's not by race. There's the rich and there's the poor. These are the classes that are in America.
The 400 wealthiest white people in this country have the same cumulative amount of wealth as all 41 million black people in this country combined. Let me restate, so you know that I did not misstate. 400 people, the same cumulative amount of wealth as all 41 million black folks combined, right? And the wealthiest 1,000 people, the same amount, well, 1,000 white people, the same amount of cumulative wealth as all black and Latino folks in this country combined. Now, no one in their right mind is going to suggest that there are 400 white people that have worked that much harder than all black Americans and 1,000 that have worked that much harder than all black and Latino folks. And yet, if that's not the explanation, what is? Well, this inertia, this ability to rack up advantages. It's like an 8-lap race. I've got a 5-lap head start. Here's the deal. I'm supposed to cross the finish line first.
Bible tells us that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. The Bible tells us that when we look at somebody for their character, okay, especially like in the church, if we're looking for a pastor or a leader, the kind of leader you want is somebody that is not greedy for filthy lucre. If you have $1 billion, that's more money than you're going to spend in your whole life. But you got people with hundreds of millions of dollars and they still want more. Instead of investing back in the economy and giving people livable wages, no, what they want to do is cut out unions and privatize places that have unions and high wages and livable wages, because what? Less they can pay a person, the more profit they can make. Why do you think slavery was around in the first place? What's better than paying somebody minimum wage? Paying them nothing and then reaping all the profits and benefits. We call that in America capitalism. And that's another video, the evils of capitalism. But this is the devil system that we're running. And this is the devil's nation that we're running right now. Why? If the nation is running the devil system, if the nation is electing the devil's politicians or the devil's leaders, if the nation is using the devil's separation, then it's the devil's nation. It's not a Christian nation. Okay? So let's dispel that right now. Who is the problem? Well, we're going to talk about those who call themselves Christian nationalists, but there's nothing Christian about them. Who calls themselves people who wants to make America great again, but their idea of America being great is what Trump calls the golden era. The golden era was the 1950s. If you look at any time frame of the 1950s, if you Google it, you see the 1950s was a time where certain segments of the society could not vote. This was a time where there was redlining. This was a time where there was Jim Crow. This was a time where certain people had to sit in the back of the bus. This was a time where, you understand what I'm saying? Is that when America was great? Is that what you mean by make America great again? Well, obviously, to a lot of people, this irony or this expression is not hidden to them. This is exactly what they mean by make America great again. Because in their eyes, that's when America was great. When you had the segregation and all kind of economic inequalities. Okay? Because going back to the love of money, being the root of all evil, going back to divide and conquer by Satan, his strategy, we're not ignorant of his devices. He still uses the same devices today. We are talking about a system in a place, in a country, who has not only rode this system to death, to the detriment of 99% of the population, and to the enjoyment of 1%, we find people that are too ignorant to understand what the 1% is doing to the 99%, because they are so wrapped up in quote unquote race, so wrapped up in quote unquote economic stature by the color of their skin, to see that there is no such thing in reality. That was something made up by men who wanted to dominate other men way back in a time where they realized that they had to do something to keep one class of people down and another class of people up.
Now we're going to let you testify in court, enter into contracts, vote, at least if you're a man, own a little bit of land, at least if you're a man, right? And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. No more of that, because you're too good for that. And we're going to take the white men, now called white men, and put them on the slave patrol to keep black people in line. Give them a horse and a gun and a badge and make them feel big and powerful, right? They're still poor. They still don't have anything. They didn't pay the slave patrol well, right? Just exploited them, used them as a buffer between the elite and the other poor folks, particularly poor folks of color. And pretty soon the rebellions that occasionally happened where black and white got together to overthrow the elite, those stopped because the divide and conquer had begun to work, right? You could turn people against each other by telling those poor white folks, they got to keep these black people in line. And so that divide and conquer gets initiated in the colonies. Rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown.
And I just don't mean by color. Again, these people that were the taskmasters wasn't rich either. These people that were taskmasters were huddled up in a house with 6 of them in there and one little tub in the middle, too. But they thought they looked at themselves as better because, hey, at least we got the whips and we ride the horses. Not a pot to piss in. Yet they saw themselves as better. You got people seeing themselves as better just because of the color of their skin, and they're living in a single wide trailer home with no vehicle and a dirt road to get there, voting for a billionaire that could care less about their well-being. Now, is this a Christian nation? Of course not. The Bible tells us what a Christian nation is. First of all, to be a Christian nation, you have to be what is a theocracy. What we have here is a democracy, meaning that the majority of people vote. Is that a good thing? Well, depends what kind of heart the majority of the people have. Depends on what kind of intelligence the majority of the people have. If they have a heart for God, a heart for each other, love, if they are educated and pretty well read and well knowledgeable people, could be a good thing. If they're not well read, if they're not knowledgeable, if they have an evil heart, and I'm talking about the majority, it could be a bad thing. Bible tells us we shall know people by their fruit, the things that they bear, the things that they have exhibited, and I'm going to use this word, hanging off them. Okay? The traits they have hanging off them. You could have good fruit or bad fruit. Okay? Rotten to the core or right. America has fruit that is rotten to the core. You can see how they treated people in the past, and you can see how they treat people in the present. The Bible says that we are our brother's keeper, right? The Bible tells us who our neighbor is. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, we see very clearly that this one person understood what God meant by loving his neighbor, loving his brother, right? He took care of a total stranger and went to the innkeeper when he seen the guy beat up by robbers and stuff, took him to the inn, dressed his wounds, paid the innkeeper money to take care of him, and said, when I come back, whatever I owe you, I will pay you that as well. Not knowing this guy at all, he understood who his neighbor is. The problem again is going back to the old trick of Satan. A lot of people see people coming across that border. A lot of people see people coming from other nations, impoverished, poor, running from violence and all that. And instead of their heart crying out to them, instead of yearning for them, instead of having any kind of empathy whatsoever, what they see is someone else, someone other than them, not their neighbor. And they consider themselves Christian, but they're not their neighbor. Why? Because they're a different color. Why? They're different nationality, a different race. Is that what the Bible teaches? Christian? Well, if you think that's what the Bible teaches, it goes again to prove what America is all about when they say MAGA, make America great. It proves what America is all about when it says that they are a quote unquote Christian nation. It proves what America is all about when they claim something that they're not. America, again, is not a Christian nation. And it never was. It was always a democracy, not a theocracy. And as far as that, one country under God and then liberty and justice for all and all that, there was a certain group of people when that was written, they were never included in that. They were never sought out as being equals to other people who had wrote these things. When it was talking about these things, justice and equality and all that stuff, it wasn't talking about the two-fifth, three-fifth. It wasn't talking about the what they considered to be a savage. It wasn't talking about what they considered to be a heathen. It wasn't talking about the person they considered to be lesser than, who was only good for slavery, who was only good for field work. It wasn't talking about, it was never inclusive of all men. So when it says that all men are created equal, it wasn't talking about certain men, certain women, certain people. But that's neither here or there. Again, is this a Christian nation? Is this the golden age that we want to return to? And again, the answer is yes, for many people. But again, that's because America is a Christian nation. We got Christian nationalism.